Welcome to today's deep dive. We have a genuinely thought-provoking set of source materials to explore with you today.
We really do. It's quite the text.
Yeah, and if you have ever spent time examining how different cultures view the afterlife or what metrics societies use to define a good person, you're going to find this analysis particularly compelling.
Absolutely.
So our focus today is a translated philosophical and spiritual excerpt. It's dated February 18th, 2024, and it's titled The Path to Heaven.
Right.
And our mission for this deep dive is to thoroughly explore this highly specific, radical, and honestly surprisingly unconventional framework that the text presents. We're looking at what heaven actually is according to this source, exactly what it takes to get there, and the surprisingly detailed alternative for those who don't quite make the cut.
Which is most of us. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, exactly. Because reading through the translation, it becomes immediately clear that the author aims to flip traditional religious and moral paradigms completely upside down. I mean, it challenges almost every conventional metric humanity uses to measure spiritual worth. It's just a fascinating read.
It is. The framework presented here certainly bypasses the status quo of most mainstream spiritual traditions.
Mm-hmm.
But to begin, the author establishes a rather grounded premise before moving into the more demanding cosmic requirements. The text suggests that to understand the nature of heaven, you actually don't need to look beyond the physical world.
It's right here.
Exactly. It posits that heaven can be perceived right here on Earth. And to illustrate this, the author points to a specific model called the second home.
The second home, right.
Yes, which was created by an organization identified as the Life Zen Center. Now, the text clarifies that while this second home is not heaven itself, it serves as the closest earthly approximation.
Like a blueprint.
Basically, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding its structure is, according to the author, the key to knowing heaven exists. But beyond that specific organization, the overarching philosophy is that heaven is reflected in the quality of human liberation.
How so?
Well, the text argues that if the people surrounding you consistently bring you joy, freedom, and happiness, you are already experiencing the proof of heaven's reality in the present moment.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because once the author establishes that heaven is this tangible, accessible reality, the text immediately launches into a massive, exhaustive list of things that absolutely do not matter when it comes to gaining entry.
Oh yeah, the exclusions are extensive.
It functions as the ultimate not required list.
Mm-hmm.
If you picture a screening process for this version of heaven, the criteria explicitly dismiss all the earthly pillars we typically spend our lives fortifying. I mean, the text systematically lists these out. It states that entry has absolutely nothing to do with your age or your physical appearance.
Right.
It doesn't matter who your parents are, how much wealth you've accumulated, or your level of education.
Which is huge in our society.
Exactly. Social status, political power, and even monumental historical achievements in human society are categorized as completely irrelevant.
And the author doesn't stop at secular achievements either.
No, it goes further.
Much further. The text then systematically dismantles the spiritual and moral checklists that global traditions have relied on for millennia. The framework asserts that entry into heaven is entirely divorced from religion or political affiliation.
Mm-hmm.
The author specifies that it does not matter if you have dedicated your whole life to building churches, temples, mosques, or Taoist shrines.
Oh.
Furthermore, the text dismisses the accumulation of good deeds. Saving lives, irrelevant to your entry.
That's a tough one to swallow.
It is. Burning incense, bowing in reverence, or willingly suffering through ascetic hardships. None of it matters. The text goes as far as to discard traditional concepts of karma and merit entirely. It states explicitly that it does not matter who your spiritual master is, how many disciples you lead, or which gods, Buddhas, or saints you happen to follow.
So no spiritual name-dropping. Exactly. And in perhaps its sharpest departure from Orthodox theology, the author declares that having faith and piety will not help you cross the threshold.
That presents a striking contrast to how spiritual systems usually operate. I mean, the framework essentially nullifies the concept of a spiritual resume. There is no checklist of devotions or moral victories that can be presented as proof of worthiness at the gates.
When we examine what this accomplishes philosophically, we see a fascinating duality. By entirely stripping away institutional religion, charitable donations, and human concepts of merit, the text democratizes the concept of salvation.
It puts everyone on the same level.
Precisely. The author's framework implies that no earthly institution holds the keys to heaven, and no amount of wealth or societal influence can purchase access. It levels the playing field to an absolute zero.
But there's a catch, right?
A huge one. By removing all these tangible, actionable items, the very checklists that religious structures provide to give practitioners a sense of security and progress, the author makes the path incredibly difficult. Without rules to follow, services to attend, or rituals to perform, the burden of qualification is shifted entirely inward. There is nothing external to lean on.
Which naturally leads us to the core of the text. Because if all of those secular and spiritual achievements are voided, what is the actual requirement?
There's only one.
Right. The author outlined exactly one standard for entry into heaven. The rule is that the quality of your life must be an exact match for the quality of heaven itself. And the text defines that quality as purely 100% selfless and egoless.
That is the singular metric, total dissolution of the ego.
Selfless and egoless. That is perhaps the most demanding standard a philosophical system can propose. It requires the complete eradication of the I as a concept.
Which fundamentally alters how a person interacts with existence.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because the text claims that if a person actually manages to achieve this pure egoless state, the physical mechanics of their death become entirely irrelevant.
The how and the when just stop mattering.
Humanity has always harbored a deep anxiety about mortality, right? Specifically when it will happen and how much suffering will be involved. But the author insists that the timing and manner of your physical end have no bearing on your spiritual destination. The translation uses incredibly stark, specific examples to illustrate this.
They don't sugarcoat it.
No, they don't. The text states it does not matter if you die at age 3, age 30, or live to be 300. It does not matter if you starve to death, burn to death, perish in a crash, succumb to a prolonged disease, are murdered, become trapped, or pass away quietly from old age. According to the framework, if you are genuinely selfless and egoless at the moment the physical body fails, you bypass everything else and go straight to heaven.
The philosophical weight of that passage is substantial. Throughout history, human cultures have been deeply attached to the narrative of a good death versus a bad death. A tragic, violent, or premature death is often interpreted by societies as a sign of cosmic injustice, a test of faith, or the result of bad karma.
Like they must have done something wrong to deserve that end.
Exactly. But by explicitly removing the fear and the judgment surrounding how or when one dies, the text forces the entirety of a person's spiritual focus onto the internal state of the mind. It completely severs the link between physical suffering and spiritual failure.
It decouples them completely.
Yes. In this framework, if a horrific accident befalls an egoless person, it is categorized merely as a physical event in the material world. It carries zero spiritual weight. This represents a radical detachment from the physical body and the narratives we build around survival.
It's a profound shift in perspective. If a person operates with the certainty that their internal state is already a match for heaven, the external anxieties regarding their physical demise theoretically vanish. But that immediately raises the practical question: how does one actually become selfless and egoless according to this text?
The author does lay out some specific mechanics for this process, yes.
Because it can't just be wishing it away.
No, the text outlines several specific requirements for cultivating this state, though they rely heavily on the author's unique terminology. To reach total egolessness, the framework mandates that you must repay all your debts. You must cut your worldly ties, which the text distinctly refers to as dusty attachment.
Dusty attachments.
Yes. You must practice something called formless giving, and perhaps most uniquely, you must perfect the antimatter structure of life.
Okay, let's break those down, because terms like the antimatter structure of life sound more like theoretical physics than traditional theology. How does the text define that?
Within the context of this specific philosophy, antimatter shouldn't be confused with the particle physics definition. Here, the author uses it to describe the non-physical underlying spiritual blueprint of consciousness.
So it's about the energy, not literal antimatter.
Right. In this framework, matter represents the heavy, ego-driven secular reality, wealth, status, physical desires. Therefore, the antimatter structure is the exact opposite of that. It is the purely energetic, spiritual architecture of a being. Perfecting it means refining your consciousness until absolutely none of that heavy earthly ego remains. You are structurally aligning yourself with the non-material frequency of heaven.
And the dusty attachments it mentioned.
Dusty attachments is a metaphor the author uses for the ties that bind us to the secular world. Family obligations, career ambitions, societal reputation, emotional dependencies. These are viewed as dust that settles heavily on the soul.
obscuring that antimatter structure.
Exactly. It anchors you to the ego. To be egoless, you have to wipe the dust clean and sever those ties.
Which brings us to formless giving. The text's approach to altruism and charity is highly paradoxical. In fact, it seems to completely redefine what it means to help someone, taking direct aim at the human savior complex.
It does. The text insists emphatically that an individual should never harbor the thought, I want to save sentient beings, or I am helping others.
But let's pause there and apply some friction to that idea. If someone is drowning in a river and I pull them out, they are objectively saved from drowning. Doesn't the framework acknowledge the material good of that action regardless of my ego? How does the author reconcile the actual physical benefit to the person being helped?
What's fascinating here is how strictly the author separates the physical event from the spiritual reality. The physical body might be pulled from the river, but spiritually the text argues that sentient beings do not actually need you to save them.
That's a tough pill to swallow.
It is, but the logic posits that whenever you think you are stepping in as a savior, you are fundamentally only serving your own spiritual cultivation. Saving yourself is saving sentient beings. If you perform a rescue or donate to charity, but you internally claim the title of helper or savior, you have just reinforced your own ego.
So the outward action is charity, but the inward reality is an ego trap.
Exactly. Formless giving is the practice of giving where the concept of a giver, a receiver, and the gift itself completely dissolve from your mind.
The author also warns explicitly against the mindset of doing something for someone else's benefit, particularly the phrase, I am doing this for your own good.
Correct. The text identifies that specific mindset as a symptom of deep ignorance. The author argues that you fundamentally do not know what is objectively good or bad in the grand scheme of another person's cosmic journey.
Because we only see a tiny fraction of their path.
Right. What you, from your limited human perspective, perceive as a good intervention might actually be bad for that individual's necessary spiritual development. Conversely, what you view as a bad situation might be exactly what they need to experience.
So by claiming you are doing something for their own good, you are arrogantly assuming you possess universal knowledge.
The text completely strips away our right to judge or manage the experiences of others.
I want to invite you, the listener, to reflect on that specific concept for a moment. Think about the dynamics in your own life. Consider the times you have gone out of your way to assist someone or offered unsolicited guidance because you genuinely believed you knew the best path for them. Through the lens of this text, how much of that intervention was actually driven by the ego's desire to feel useful, to feel morally superior, or to exert control over a situation?
It's an uncomfortable reflection for most of us.
It really is. The author is unrelenting on this point. As long as there's an I who feels pride in assisting others, true egolessness remains out of reach. You are still entangled in the transactional nature of human relationships.
And the author is quite pragmatic about how difficult it is to disentangle from those transactions. The text provides a stark reality check regarding the environment most of humanity inhabits. It observes that we live in a secular world structured entirely by money, power, class dynamics, family units, and national borders.
All things that require an ego to navigate.
Exactly. These are the fundamental pillars of human society. Because survival in this environment inherently requires an ego, you need an identity to work, to protect your family, to navigate society. The author admits that achieving absolute selflessness in this setting is nearly impossible. Finding a truly selfless, egoless person in the secular world is described as an incredibly rare anomaly.
That pragmatic admission by the author leads directly back to the second home created by the Life Sense Center, which you mentioned at the beginning. If the secular world makes egolessness impossible, what role does this specific organization play?
According to the framework established in the text, the optimal, perhaps only reliable place for this highly specific type of cultivation is the second home. The implication is that to truly perfect the antimatter structure and drop the ego, an individual requires a highly curated, intentional environment.
An incubator.
Yes, the second home functions as a space where the standard pressures of secular life capitalism, traditional family structures, societal status are actively removed. It is an incubator designed specifically to eliminate the frictions that constantly force the ego to react and defend itself.
So what does this all mean for the vast majority of humanity? For the billions of people who live in the secular world, who navigate mortgages, raise families, pursue careers, and maintain very active egos just to survive?
That's the ultimate question.
Right. Because if total egolessness is the singular requirement for heaven, and secular life makes that impossible, are we looking at a system of eternal punishment? In many global traditions, falling short of the ultimate standard results in fire, brimstone, or agonizing spiritual torment. But this text pivots in a remarkably different direction.
It does. Instead of eternal damnation, the text offers an alternative that is surprisingly devoid of moral judgment. The author concludes that if an individual realistically cannot achieve a selfless and egoless state, they should simply give up the illusion of going to heaven.
Just drop the goal entirely.
Yes, the directive is to stop stressing over it. Furthermore, it advises that you should stop worrying about distinguishing between true and false or good and evil. The logic is that if you aren't going to transcend the ego, you should let go of the spiritual anxiety altogether.
The framework basically grants permission to drop out of the spiritual race without the threat of a cosmic penalty.
Precisely, because failing to achieve heaven does not result in torture. According to the text, you will simply reincarnate in what it calls the middle and lower realms. The author provides a very specific cycle to illustrate this mechanism.
Right, the text states that you might be a human in this life, a dog in the next life, a pig in the one after that, and then return to being a human again. It details an endless cycle of reincarnation across different species.
A biological carousel.
A human, a dog, a pig, and back to a human, riding an endless biological carousel.
If we connect this to the bigger picture the author is painting, the perspective on this cycle is remarkably tranquil. The text explains that within this cycle of reincarnation, an entity will experience everything the material world has to offer: the sour, the sweet, the bitter, the spicy. They will know intense joy and profound sorrow, the beginnings of life and the ends of death.
But they won't remember any of it.
Crucially, no. The text emphasizes that you will live each life without knowing anything about your past lives. You will go back and forth, living in what the author translates as a muddle. It's a state of pure sensory experience devoid of overarching cosmic context. And the author explicitly and impartially describes this fate as also not a bad choice.
It is a profound departure from traditional ultimate stakes theology. The author essentially lays out two distinct paths. One is an elite, extraordinarily rigorous state of pure egoless existence that grants entry to heaven. It is a path so demanding it requires severing all earthly attachments.
And the other path?
The other path is to simply exist in the universe. Eating scraps as a pig, running through a yard as a dog, experiencing the complex emotional spectrum of a human navigating the messy, spicy, bitter, and sweet reality of the material world.
It removes the concept of ultimate punishment from the cosmic equation entirely. In this framework, failing to reach heaven is not a moral failing or a sin. It is simply a choice of experience. An entity either chooses the demanding, highly curated path of dissolving the self, or they choose the chaotic, colorful, memory-wiped experience of the reincarnation cycle. The text validates both as mechanical realities of the universe.
As we look at the entirety of this deep dive, we are left with a text that presents a striking dichotomy. On one side of the ledger, there is an absolute, uncompromising demand for complete egolessness if one wishes to enter heaven. It is a singular standard that renders decades of earthly achievements, religious piety, and acts of charity completely void if they are tainted in any way by the concept of I.
It demands the perfection of the antimatter structure and the complete abandonment of the secular world.
Exactly. But on the other side of the ledger, it presents a paradigm where failing to meet that impossible standard is not a catastrophe. Just living life across different species, experiencing the full spectrum of earthly emotions in a continuous state of forgetfulness, is presented as a perfectly acceptable way to exist in the cosmos. It challenges the listener to completely reevaluate the stakes of their own spiritual philosophy.
This raises an important question, something worth exploring further based on the mechanics we've unpacked today. The text states that in this cycle of reincarnation, moving from human to dog to pig, the entity completely forgets its past lives. It exists, as the author puts it, coming and going in a muddle.
A total memory wipe every time.
Right. But if the ultimate, highest goal of this universe is total egolessness, could the act of reincarnating across different species, constantly having your memories, your human intellect, and your specific identity wiped clean, actually be the universe's ultimate mechanism for slowly eroding that ego?
Oh, that is fascinating. Like the muddle is the method.
Yes. We typically view the muddle of forgetting who we were as a failure to achieve enlightenment. But what if it's the exact opposite? What if being forced to experience the world with the simple, unpretentious consciousness of a dog or a pig is the exact medicine a stubborn human ego requires? Perhaps this continuous humbling memory wipe is not a concession prize for failing to reach heaven, but the very process required over eons to eventually perfect that mysterious antimatter structure of life.
Thank you for joining us on this custom deep dive today. We hope this exploration of the path to heaven has provided you with a new lens through which to examine your own perspectives on spirituality, altruism, and the ego. Whether you find yourself drawn to the rigorous pursuit of selflessness or you were simply navigating the sweet and sour muddle of the human experience, keep asking those difficult questions. Keep challenging the frameworks you are handed, and remember that sometimes the metrics we assume are mandatory aren't required at all. We will catch you next time.